And we are live. So, hello, Cobbs Corner family, and welcome to another exciting edition of Talk Time with Morgan Cobbs, your one stop shop for all things TV, film, and pop culture. If this is your first time listening, then welcome. And to my returning listeners, welcome back. This is the 86th episode of Cobbs Corner, so thank you for listening and sharing this broadcast. So far on this podcast, I have reviewed a variety of movies, TV shows. We've talked about pop culture events. I even talked about one documentary. Long time listeners of Cobb's Corner will remember the documentary that I had talked about back in March of last year. I have yet to discuss a book on this podcast, and the book we're discussing today is a book that I think deserves to be adapted into either a film or a mini series at some point. Okay. Some of you might have heard of this book, and some of you might have even read this book. It actually came out this year. I'm talking about none other than The Mighty 690. My next guest is an award-winning journalist whose work has been recognized by the Los Angeles Press Club, where he was nominated as the Journalist of the Year in 2020. He is a lawyer by training whose articles have appeared in the OC Weekly, and he has been a featured panelist on national news networks, including CNN and Fox News. And he is the author of The Mighty 690. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and give a warm Cobb's Corner welcome to the one, the only, Mr. Alexander Hamilton Cherin. What's going on?
Thank you, Morgan. I appreciate it. Quite the introduction. Very much appreciated and happy to be here.
My pleasure. My pleasure. We are live. We're live on YouTube. So anyone watching this live on YouTube, feel free to comment down below in the chat. Post a comment. Let us know where you're watching from, and let us know you're here. So typically, whenever I have a new guest on the podcast, what I'll do is, you see, given that I primarily will talk about we'll talk about superhero movies. It typically will, like when I started the podcast, it was all like Marvel movies. I'm obsessed with origin stories. So I guess for myself and for the listeners, I want to know, what is Alex? Is it cool to call you Alex?
Absolutely.
Okay, yep, Alex. What is Alex Cherin's origin story? Just like, who are you? What do you do? What's like your background, sort of thing?
I appreciate that. Great question. So, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I was born and raised in Southern California, in Long Beach, which is just south of Los Angeles, part of LA County, kind of on the border between Los Angeles County and Orange County. I was schooled in public schools my entire life and went away to the Midwest for college, came back to Southern California for law school, and thought that I always wanted to be a lawyer. So passed the bar and practiced litigation at a big Los Angeles law firm for many, many, many years, and started to get a little bit disillusioned with the practice of law as something being sustainable, and always found an outlet in creative writing. And so for the first probably 10 years or so of my legal career, would often write creatively just as an outlet, really no audience other than myself. Towards the end of my legal career, decided to give writing a real serious try. And so a friend of mine at the time was the editor-in-chief of the Orange County Weekly, which was a mid-sized publication in Orange County, California, and was given the opportunity to write a column called Yesternow, which really focused on pop culture history of Southern California. It was placed on the inside back page for about a year or so, and was able to write articles on rock and roll history of Southern California, cool places in Southern California that maybe flew under the radar. And one of the articles that I wrote about was a real life radio contest that occurred when I was 11 years old and growing up in Southern California on a station called the Mighty 690. And that article was published, I believe, in about 2018-19. And was given a lot of feedback on the story. A lot of people liked it, but wanted to learn more, and thought that the best way that I could do that was to use that as the basis for a fiction story, and so fictionalized that story, and that's what became The Mighty 690, which was published earlier this year. So that's a little bit about me.
Wow. It's definitely quite the origin story, I guess.
Right.
I realized that this book, again, to my listeners, well, can't really see it because of the background. If you have not read The Mighty 690, I highly recommend you go and read it. And at the end of the episode, we'll talk about like where the listeners can find it. You said you were 11 years old when the radio contest happened?
Yes. So I was 11. It was the summer of 1981, and just a little bit of background on the story. So this was a time before the internet, and obviously before even really cable television, and so radio was really sort of a predominant pop culture factor in the lives of kids at that time. And in Southern California, and I'm sure not dissimilar to other places in the country, there were many stations that you could listen to, and it sort of defined who you were as a kid. You listened to rock stations or rap stations or AM pop stations, which is what the Mighty 690 was. But there were also these efforts by these radio stations to really gain listenership and popularity, and one of the ways they would do that was coming up with contests that would hook people. And so I very vividly remember as an 11-year-old listening to this radio station and listening to this radio contest, which was a buried treasure contest. The radio station took $50,000 and they buried it somewhere in Southern California, and then gave clues as to its whereabouts. And they gave one clue a day for a week to kind of give people hints. And at the end of that week, somebody found the $50,000, and they repeated this contest a few more times. But I always found it fascinating, and it really tied people together at that time. And this is before chat rooms and internet and things that otherwise would tie people together now. Well before social media, but radio really had the power to do that at the time, and really wanted to capture that in this book.
It's funny when you mention radio, like I recognize, I realize that you and I are from like two totally different eras. Me, I will never know what life was like without the internet.
Right.
I definitely listened to the radio growing up. Like I remember on the way to school, I'd listen to these are kind of local stations to Connecticut where I'm from. Like we had like there's pop stations, there's like I think Casey 101's one of them, 95.7, 93.7 is one of the rap stations out here. And they would do like the phone taps, like the scripted prank calls and that sort of things. That's kind of, I guess, my generation's like exposure to radio. But I always get a kick out of like when there's historical events, where like things happen, whether that be like, God forbid a tragedy happens or, something amazing happens in the world, and you remember like where you were when it happened. Like, I was, this amount of years old, or like I was at this place at this time. Some folks probably remember exactly what they had on, like when it happened. So that's why I just had to ask you, like, you're 11, so you're 11 years old, Southern California. And, I was thinking of like, when you had said how there's different clues, I was thinking of the movie A Christmas Story.
Yeah.
And how there's a scene where I think Ralphie, he has like this decoder or something, and he's like listening to the radio, and then it's like, drink your Ovaltine.
That's exactly right.
Like,
yeah, that was by the way, that was a great film. And that was I think based on a book by a journalist, Gene Shepard, and whose writing was very, very good. But yeah, no, the clue, it's a little hokey now in 2024 to look back on this radio contest in 1981. But again, you've got to remember, this is, as you mentioned, Morgan, this is before the internet. This is before social media. This is before all those things that really tie us together now did not exist. And radio was really one of the last things to kind of do that before the advent of, the digital age and the computer and the internet. And so I really wanted to kind of capture that, that in this book.
Definitely. I mean, as I'm reading the book, it's like I feel like the end of like each chapter, I can almost like imagine in my mind like the credits rolling, and it's like next week on the Mighty
Yeah.
690.
No,
Like,
I structured. I'm glad you picked up on that, Morgan, because I tried to structure it that way a little bit. I mean, that's what influenced me as a kid, and that's what I kind of know in my writing is that sort of segmented way of creative writing and movie making and TV shows. I mean, when I was a kid, that's what you had. The shows came on once a week at the same time, and there was a little bit of a cliffhanger to make sure that you tuned in the following week. Very unlike today, where you can binge watch an entire season of something, without having to leave the couch, and you've got about a 10-second delay between the end of the first episode and the beginning of the next one, and you can even skip over that on Netflix or whatever you want by pressing a button. So, no, I really wanted to pay homage to that. I'm glad you picked up on that.
yeah. I mean, even today in like the streaming in the streaming service, and well, I guess because this is kind of like the primary focus like of the podcast. So I guess by by talking about this book, I'm I guess going outside of genre for a minute, for good reason. I guess I'm sort of like torn between like the whole with streaming, because some streaming shows, I think some streaming shows on like Disney Plus, like I know a lot of the Star Wars shows, it's like new episodes every Tuesday, or or a lot of the shows on FX, it's like FX, Tuesday nights at 8 o'clock, next day on Hulu. So
Yeah.
I'm sort of torn between like that and then them just throwing the entire season on Netflix, or just throwing it on there like all at once,
Yeah.
or this new thing that Netflix is doing with the last season of Cobra Kai, where they've broken it up into 3 parts. Like I think they tried that 2 years ago with Stranger Things. It was like part 1 and then part 2, and now they're doing like Cobra Kai season 6. It was like part 1 was back in July, part 2 I gotta wait till November, part 3 I gotta wait till next year. Like
No, I have very mixed feelings about that too. And look, there is really good content on TV now, but there's a lot of it, and it comes in many different forms. And if you like that kind of slow burn, you can watch one episode and then wait for the next week. We just finished watching the updated version of Time Bandits that Taika Waititi did on Apple TV, and we were waiting for the next week to come so that we could watch the next episode. I think if it had been introduced all at once, I don't know if we would have enjoyed it as much. So there's something in that build up where you can kind of think about it and kind of reflect on the last episode and get geared up for the next one. I think that's kind of a lost art. So I appreciate the shows that do that. When we watched The Last of Us on HBO, I think it was HBO.
yeah.
There was a week in between episodes, and we just couldn't wait for the next one to come out. So.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned the Last of Us. I know season 2 is coming. I'm not familiar with the video game at all. I haven't finished season 1, and I'm trying to start White Lotus.
White
which
Lotus
is also
fantastic.
Max.
Yeah, White Lotus is fantastic. But bringing it full circle to the book, I'm glad you noticed that, because I wanted a little bit of a suspense between one chapter and the next. And if you also notice that we kind of jump between time periods and jump between characters, and I've always enjoyed that sort of non-linear storytelling, and I think it keeps people interested. So I'm glad you picked up on that.
Yeah, it's almost like an anthology in a way. It's like different. It's like different stories that all exist. It's like surrounding this one event. Like they all exist within like the same universe, the same like shared timeline, and they all kind of converge at the end when they actually find the money. Well, I don't want to reveal too much, but
No.
that's kind of like the structure.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that. So one of my biggest influences as a kid was a book, and then it was turned into a play called Spoon River Anthology, And it was the story of different folks who lived in a fictional town, Spoon River, based on the epitaphs on their gravestones, and they all connected somehow, at the end, but you weren't quite sure. But they all lived; they were all, folks who lived in the town, shared kind of common space, and so I'm really glad you picked up on that, because the anthology sort of platform is one that I was really going after in this book.
Yeah. One thing I liked about the anthology aspect of it was the fact that the four different people who end up I guess, participating in the scavenger hunt, they're from like four completely different walks of life. You had like one who was like the single mother who was like embezzling funds, and you had another who was like motor the motocross
Yep.
driver,
Yep.
and like,
Yep. Yeah.
and
No.
then
Yeah.
yeah,
And you had a Holocaust survivor, and then you had
focus on that.
who worked as a janitor at the local temple, and then a student at the temple. And it's interesting. So they really have, on the surface, have nothing in common, but when you dig a little bit deeper, one of the things that I tried to do in the book was show that they were all very much products of that same place and same time. So they shared space, right? They all lived in Southern California, which this book, I mean, truth be told, is really a love letter to Southern California at that time. It was this wide open space with lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds, but sort of all shared this, common thread of, living in what many Americans perceive to be the American dream, right? Sunny California with its beaches and endless opportunity. And so they all shared that. They also shared a little bit of desperation for different reasons. And so, those were kind of the themes that I wanted to bring out in the book. But yeah, very, very, very sort of unrelated on the surface. But as the book kind of goes on and you dig deeper, you find out that, yeah, maybe they do share some things in common.
Okay, I see. I see. It's funny you said you said how like many of us now. I'm from the East Coast. Many of us who are not from California, those of us who are not from, well, I guess specifically Southern California, Los Angeles County. I know they're hosting the Olympics in 2028. Woohoo! Um, it's like, I guess many of us, we have this sort of romanticized idea of whether if it's New York on the East Coast or California on the West Coast, we have this sort of romanticized idea of like the American dream and like making it big either in New York or in Hollywood. And I think it's called like I forget what it stands for, the IFD disease, infatuation, and then I think like, which then leads to, I think, like frustration. I forget what the D stands for. But it's just this like this romanticized idea of what like Hollywood and all like the lights and like, oh, if I can, if I could just make it out there and then I'll, make it to the big time and everything will be great. But then you actually get there and it's not like reality. It's like I was there's a comedian, Ronnie Chiang, and he has a Netflix special, Asian Comedian Destroys America, and from 2019, really good stand-up special. Go check it out. He says how like being that he's originally from China, he says how like outside of the United States, in China, they view America as the NBA. Like, this is the best. This is where you go to, be the best at whatever it is you're doing and to be among the best people. They're the best at doing what they're doing. This is the best. This is the NBA. And then you actually get here and everybody hates everything. So
Right.
I mean,
No,
so I think like,
yeah,
yeah.
that's really perceptive, Morgan, that you brought that up. So that is, and it's one of the reasons I like writing, is because once in a while people will read your stuff and they kind of get what you were going for. That's exactly what I was going for with this book. Is that, my experience in the 80s at that time in Southern California is that it had a lot of promise and a lot of potential, but for most people, it didn't really quite work out the way that they wanted it to, or that other people would imagine that it should be, the way things should be in Southern California. So, people fell short of their dreams a little bit, and they wanted to get that $50,000 because they thought it would change their lives. And guess what? only one person could find it, everybody else didn't. And the Southern California dream for them ended up not materializing in the way that they thought. So that is precisely what I was going for in this book.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like, I guess, well, I mean, I get that it was 1981. I don't have my inflation calculator in front of me, but I'm not sure what $50,000 would be worth today. But I feel like when you don't have it, $50,000 sounds like a lot of money. It
For sure.
sounds like the golden amount. It's like I'm, set for not set for life, but I'm at least keep my head above water. If I win that $50,000, or whether it be like the nice car or the nice house, it's like, I'm solid. But what they don't tell you is all the, well, I mean, $50,000, how far can that really go in today's economy? And they don't tell you, like, I guess, all the strings that come with that. And it's like, you get the 50,000, but then the side effect, but that comes at a price, because it was a whole scavenger hunt. And, they probably, I guess in reality, they probably could have gotten like half of the San Fernando Valley looking for this $50,000. And like, you're the one person who's found it. So now there's kind of a target on your back.
Yeah. Well, in reality, the actual radio contest, and if you read, there are varying versions of kind of what really happened. So again, this book was just my imagination and just a fictionalized version. Although a lot of these characters, in fact, all of them are based on folks that I knew, and that I think to me represented what that place was like at that time the best. But in reality, the radio station, gave away the $50,000, but it wasn't actually buried cash. It was, found. The clues led to an abandoned car on Balboa Island, which is a little peninsula down near Newport Beach in South Orange County. And the clues led to an abandoned car, and there was a placard in the back of on the backside of a license plate. And it entitled the winner to $50,000 paid out over a few years. The person who actually found it, I think, was a minor, and so had to bring their parents in. And it ended up being a lot less intriguing than I think what I tried to write about. So there's a little bit of a disconnect between what you were talking about, between the ideal and kind of reality.
It's almost like the quest to find the Holy Grail. It's like,
yes, exactly.
It's like,
that's exactly right.
It's like you're looking for the Holy Grail, and then it, come to find out that there is no real Holy Grail, or it's correct. Like, there's a process, or no, it's going to be paid over the course of like, we got to set up a payment plan. Right. Hold on, you got to enroll in this.
Exactly, but to bring it full circle to your discussion about Ralphie from A Christmas Story, I mean, if you remember that scene in the anticipation of him getting the decoder ring and listening to the radio station, and as the suspenseful music is building, and he's rushing to figure out, and it just ends up being a crummy advertisement, in his words. So, yeah, a little bit of a disappointment.
Right. But I get that, like with your novel, it's more imagination instead of reality, and I think your novel is very, it's very, like, I guess, hopeful, and I kind of touched on this in my last episode when I did Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and how Jefferson Smith was kind of like hopelessly idealistic. He said, I'm gonna go to the Senate, and I'm gonna get this bill passed for the Boy Rangers Club. I mean, go listen to that episode. I'm not gonna talk too much about it now, but just that hopeless, that not hopeless, but that like radical idealism, radical positivity, of like, in the midst of whatever the reality is, I know that we can make it through. There's, $50,000. It's out there somewhere. I'm going to listen to the clues. I guess I'm trying to say is it kind of gave folks hope.
For sure. And it's the same kind of hope you get when you buy a lottery ticket, right? There's the best, 5 minutes is the 5 minutes after you buy the lottery ticket, thinking what you're going to do with the money when you win it, right? It's not the 5 minutes after you find out you didn't win it. It's that hopeful optimism. And I really tried to capture that in this book. And I think the characters did too. And as I mentioned, these characters are really based on, people that I grew up with here in California, and sort of represented, how optimistic people were sort of at that time in the late 70s and the early 80s. Anything was possible, but then, some of them, kind of fell short and just learned to kind of live and be hopeful anyway, even though they didn't find the money. So, one of the characters, is based on a motorcycle racer that races on an oval track in Orange County, California. That's an actual race that still goes on to this day. In fact, I'm going next Saturday night to the Costa Mesa Speedway down at the Orange County Fairgrounds, and that's been going on for 40 years, and there's still people kind of chasing that dream. And the janitor is based on the janitor at my temple growing up in Long Beach, California, who was a Holocaust survivor, and who really just wanted to try to find some peace in his life. And I really wanted to kind of pay respects to him, and sort of he came to California to realize that dream, and so wanted to do him a little bit of justice. And then the single mother, Sally, in this book is based on a real person who I grew up down the street from, who was a struggling single mother. She worked at a bank, and she didn't do the things that the character does in the book, but she was representative of kind of that, hey, I'm here to kind of forge my path and this time. And, even though things may not work out for me in the romanticized way that people think they should, they're still going to work out for me, and I'm still going to remain hopeful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you said that next Saturday there's a there's a race happening.
Yeah, so at the Orange County Fairgrounds in Costa Mesa, California, for the last 40 years at least, they've had a speedway races, and so Saturday nights you can go out and watch guys, race around an oval track. They race on motorcycles that have no brakes, and crash quite a bit, and it's sort of the last vestige of that daredevil kind of culture from the 70s and 80s, but it's still there. So I'm looking forward to doing that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Would you say that with everything going on, like in the world today, especially like, I guess, post-COVID, post-pandemic, would you say that we need more novels and maybe even more like movies and shows that are similar to your own?
Well, I'm biased, of course. I think we do, but I will tell you, I'm a little concerned about, and we talked about it a little bit in the middle of the program, but I'm a little concerned about the amount of content that is out there. There is so much content that it really doesn't give people the ability to kind of find common bonds around any one thing. When I was a kid, there were 4 shows, and everybody watched at least one of those 4 shows, so you could find commonality with kids on the playground or your neighbors or your parents' friends. Now there is just so much content. It is hard for us to find commonality on any one thing. I mean, granted, there are shows like Stranger Things, which sort of transcend sort of age boundaries and other demographics, but those are really few and far between. So it's sort of a mixed bag. There's a lot of really good content out there, but there's just a lot of it.
Right. Yeah. I guess in my case, I'm old enough to, I'm 23. I'm old enough to remember a time before streaming. Like I could remember growing up in, like, I guess you could say, like, elementary school, like kindergarten, first grade. I remember Friday nights going to Blockbuster. I'm old enough to remember Blockbuster and picking out a movie, they would have like, I think they had like whole seasons of shows on Blockbuster. Yeah. I remember when Netflix, I think like circa 2007, when like Netflix had DVD service, like when they had like the DVDs, and I remember like streaming was new. I remember like 2008, like watching movies instantly online, like that was a process. That was like new kind of like developing technology. So I guess for I guess you could say for like the older side of Gen Z, those of us, I guess between 18 and 25, you know, my age demographic, we came of age with streaming. You know, we kind of came of age with, you know, like I can remember when Netflix was added to like the Wii and to the Xbox 360 to the PS3, like that's when it really became a big thing. And we still had cable. Like I grew up watching cable. I grew up watching you know, kind of all these different shows, and I guess to your point of like of it's almost impossible to like find that common ground. I guess for me, when I was in school, like we were able to kind of find that common ground, like elementary school, but then I think middle school, like around 2012, 2013, that was when like kind of the shift happened, like about 10, 11 years ago, to streaming. Blockbuster went out of business. I lived right up the street I grew up right up the street from a Blockbuster. Blockbuster went out of business, and I just saw like the transition from analog to digital.
Yeah.
It wasn't overnight, but like I'm old enough to have at least witnessed some of that, and I can at least kind of remember, you know, a time when it wasn't as instantaneous, where, you know, like the first iPad came out, I was 9. So like
Right.
a lot like kids today, like they are just, you know, in diapers using smartphones. It's like,
Right.
you know,
Right. And you know what's interesting about that, Morgan, is this radio contest that I write about, given what you just talked about, you know, given the sort of instantaneous access to information, given, you know, our streaming culture, there is no way that a contest like this could exist today. You know, it would be the clues would have been figured out in 2 seconds, you know, by some smart kid who would, you know, build an algorithm to kind of figure it out. And, you know, it's sort of, I don't know if that's a good thing. You know, I mean, you can do other kinds of contests, but a contest like this that we write about in the book, would not have existed today for that very reason.
Yeah, I guess it's very time period specific. I was gonna ask, like, do you think that contests like this could happen today? But I guess you already answered that question, so it's a hard no. You know, it's a different time period, and you know, I don't know if I've talked about this on my podcast or not, but like I also feel like maybe kids and maybe even a bit like young adults today, like we kind of have shorter attention spans. So I feel like being able to actually have one clue and then it's like tune in next week. Like I gotta wait till next week for the clue.
For sure.
Like,
no, for sure. So for a lot of reasons, I don't think a contest like this would have existed today.
No. Yeah, I also realized that I guess like 1981, like there were radio shows. There's no real like podcasts yet. So
no podcasts, just radio shows, and they were big. I mean, you had, you know, big drive time morning shows on radio, like I'm sure you did on the East Coast as well, and you know, you got your news from the radio. You know, sports were just, you know, kind of sports talk shows were just kind of burgeoning in the 80s, and so it was a very different landscape in 1981.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I guess when you were talking about I guess the different kinds of radio shows or early on, or the different kinds of radio stations, I thought back to I guess 2 of Quentin Tarantino's films. His first film, Reservoir Dogs, because in that movie, like there's the scene, like I'm not gonna repeat what is said because this podcast is on YouTube. But like there's a scene where like they're all in the car and like they're listening, and like the movie's set in the 90s, but they're like listening to like the super sounds of the 70s, and like there's all these like throwback radio stations, and then there's the radio station from Death Proof, the movie Death Proof with Kurt Russell, probably Tarantino's most confusing film. So yeah, like that's, I guess my first point is like it's like earlier in our conversation when you said that you had all these different kinds of radio stations, and that was kind of like where you got your music back then. And
100%.
yeah, I mean, I just watched there's a documentary on Paramount Plus, 2-part documentary about how music got free, and it's about like the rise of like CDs and like Napster and LimeWire and like the illegal like downloading and like ripping of of CDs,
Music.
like
Yeah.
the crime we all committed way back when.
Yes. Yeah, Napster. I remember. I mean, I had Napster when I was in college. That'll show you how old I am. But
Right.
going back to the Tarantino thing, he grew up pretty close to where I grew up at about the same time I grew up, and so I know that radio, had the same kind of influence on him. Yeah, and that in that movie in Reservoir Dogs, the super sounds of the '70s is that weekend it's a constant theme throughout the film, and so. It's good to see him pay homage to that as well.
Right, yeah. I guess the question I was ultimately trying to ask, and I guess it's ironic for myself as a podcaster, how like radio shows, like but before there were podcasts, there were radio shows, and you had to tune in like then and there. There was and then there was maybe a replay later on in the day, but you had to listen to the radio. And like, I mean, I remember listening to a few radio shows growing up on the way to school, and they maybe do like a replay later on in the day. But for the most part, you had to listen to the radio in the morning, and I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, there's services now like Sirius XM and like satellite radio, and then like if you have the app, you can re-listen to an episode like up to like 2 or 3 days, but you kind of had to like tune in then and there. And I guess it's a bit of, I'll say like a blessing and a curse maybe, given the fact that we have podcasts today where you can, I guess, I mean, literally what we're doing now. It's like you can tune in live to the live broadcast, or you can like watch the replay later on. It's like you don't necessarily have to tune in, and I mean that is kind of the catch-22, I guess,
Yeah.
of modernization.
No, and it's now you have on demand and all that. And I remember, since you're a movie buff, I remember as a kid, there, again, this is before cable television, and so the local broadcast channels would broadcast the best movies at like 3 or 4 in the morning. Like I remember setting my alarm clock for 4 in the morning to go downstairs and watch the original Frankenstein, or to set my alarm clock for 3 in the morning so I could watch The Werewolf, and I mean all these classic horror films. So, but yeah, very different. I mean, I can walk into my living room now, and in 30 seconds I can watch any movie from any time ever at the click of a button. And I think that's both good and bad.
Yeah, well, it's definitely advantageous for folks like myself who's currently going through the AFI series. It's like I can just scroll through 15 different streaming services, and this movie's on this service, and this movie I gotta rent. This movie's free on YouTube. But okay,
right. Exactly.
So yeah, well, I have to say, Alex, it's been great having you here on the podcast. Again, get your copy today of the Mighty 690. Before you go, Alex, I just want to kind of, as they say on Hot Ones, like roll out the red carpet for you. Just want to kind of let our listeners know kind of what you have going on, where they can find you on social media, and
I appreciate that. I appreciate it. So you can go to my website at alexandercherin.com. The book's available on Amazon or directly from the website. And I've got an email on my website. Please, anybody that's interested on ideas or feedback, I love to hear it. And you can reach out to me directly, but that's alexandercherin.com. And the book is The Mighty 690. And yeah, Morgan, you've been incredibly insightful and really appreciate the opportunity.
It's been a pleasure.
All right.
Been a pleasure. All right. Well, I mean, that is all for today's episode, my interview with Alex Cherin. If you liked what you heard today, do not forget to give this podcast a 5-star rating and review wherever you are listening from. If you're watching this on YouTube, then like the video, share it, subscribe, and turn on those post notifications so you get notified when I upload new episodes. If you want to stay up to date on all things Cobbs Corner, then you have to follow me on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. All that information is in the description below. Feel free to email me with any movie suggestions, comments, etc. at cobbscornerpodcast@gmail.com. If you made it to the end of this episode, I greatly appreciate it. Click the video on the screen right now to listen to my latest episode. It is a complete banger. As always, I will talk to all of you in the next episode. Peace.